Okay, so thank you guys all for coming today. Excited to be here with you all. And as you know, this is really just a session to kind of give you all a crash course on how to write at an academic level. And a lot of people have very varied backgrounds in writing, and especially coming into a program like grad school, it's easy to get caught up in, old habits or not have habits to get caught up in. So this is really just to help level the playing field and bring everybody up to the same standard. So what I would love is to start by just going around and saying what you're interested in getting out of this session, what your priorities are, so I can make sure that I'm meeting those. Just tell me your name and what year you're in as well.
I'm Elaine, and I'm a first year UI Trust MS student. And I think I don't have a lot of experience with writing this semester because I'm afraid of writing. So I'm not so confident about my writings. So I hope I could get some basic ideas and makes my writing more organized, not messing all the things up in PowerPoint. Yeah. So
Great, we'll definitely talk about organizing your thoughts.
Hi, I'm Chiu Lin, and I'm from Taiwan. I'm also the first year geology student and MPH student. And I don't have any English writing before because this is the first time I've studied abroad. Yeah. So I know in just in the United States that they say how to write a paragraph organized to organized. Yeah. So I don't know, have an idea that what should I write for an essay and what the conclusion and sometimes the body and yeah.
Great.
I'm Esther. I'm a first year MPH. I very much was happy to forget all about how to cite after I graduated undergrad, so I need to relearn that. That's a lot of what I need. And I often find that my writing can be a little like, I don't know, I read a lot of newspaper. That's how I try to keep up on my reading. So I think that like there are things in newspaper writing or in current event writing that is not the same as academic writing. So I need to learn how to when to use what strengths.
Hi, I'm Tahir and I'm second year HBA. Why I'm here? I don't know. What should I say? I'll introduce myself.
Just what you're looking to get out of the session, just so I have an idea of what to address.
Well, I heard that there's a crash course, like something related to that, and I heard good feedback about it. So I'm curious. It's always good to learn more about. No matter what you think, yeah, your writing is good. There's always good and better and more and
Always improve.
yeah. So.
Great.
Hi, I am first year student of MPH course. My weakness is in grammar. I can write, I can review the article, but there is a lots of grammatical error in that.
I'm Bethany. I'm a second year MPH student. Similar to Esther, I think really writing in an academic way is what I'm looking for. And I always have so many ideas, but I always get critiques on my organization. So sometimes a professor will just reflip all of my sentences around, and it'll almost be all of my same sentences, but it'll be so much better. So like learning how to just really structure and organize my thoughts in an academic flow.
Great. So all good things. I will try to address as many of these things as possible. If you would like to work on anything at a deeper level after this session, I have individual appointments available. So just to give you a little bit of background on me, like I said, my name is Anna Yankolev. I'm the writing specialist here for the peer support team. I am a third year dual student in the public health program and in business. Most of what I'm going to talk about today, most of what I'm going to teach you all today is stuff that is very fundamental and will help build a strong foundation to work on. This is by no means going to like, coming to this is gonna give you an A on every single paper. Writing is a process, writing is a muscle that you have to exercise, and you have to work on just as any other skill you have to practice. So as I was saying, if you wanna go deeper into anything, if you want personal attention, you can schedule a private appointment with me at my Calendly link right over here. And there's plenty of opportunities for those kinds of settings as well. And I can help you with everything in the writing process, from picking a topic, writing an outline, writing a thesis, grammar, punctuation, citations. I can also help with presentations and scholarship applications, pretty much anything that falls under the umbrella of something where you would need to write or present that writing, I can help you with. So for today, we're going to be talking about why we write, how to write clearly and provocatively and persuasively. We're going to be doing a little bit of grammar and punctuation review. I'll give you some tips on how to, easy things that you can do to make your writing stronger, to really take it from that, more general level to an academic level. We're going to be giving a little bit of time towards thesis development and figuring out how to organize your paper around a thesis. And we'll also be doing a lot of talking about grammar, or about citations and references. And if at any point you have questions about anything that I'm saying, please feel free to stop me and interrupt me. So for writing clearly, what are we writing? We are writing clear, concise, relevant, and complete sentences and idea. And the clear and concise part is key to academic writing. We don't want to be meandering our sentences on this, long path to try to get to the point. We want to get right to the point. Academics have a habit of doing that, of winding and meandering, but your reader will get lost in that kind of setting. So you really want to make sure that you're taking your reader on a journey where you can hold their hand and say, take them from point A to point B. Move forward with that. And why are we writing? Writing is communication. Writing is how we take an idea that's in our head and present it to other people. And a lot of people kind of lose track of why we write. When I read their reading, it's just like, okay, it's clear that this student is just throwing words on a paper and doesn't have a purpose behind what they're writing. So always have in mind that you are trying to communicate an idea. So make your point. You want to make it persuasive. You want to maintain your audience's interest. And the way you do this is by choosing your words deliberately, constructing your sentences carefully, and using grammar and punctuation properly. It can take your writing down so quickly to an elementary level if you don't know how to use punctuation properly, or if your sentence structure is really juvenile. So having this base is really important for academic writing. So Grammarly is a great tool. It's free. It's online. They've got a lot of resources if you have any questions about grammar. So choosing your words deliberately. Be specific. I see this so often in students' writing, where they'll be like, this problem may cause a health inequity. It's like, well, which problem, which health inequity, and how? So public health is such a diverse field that you really need to be specific about what you're talking about, because if you're just saying things generally, it's like, well, you're saying everything and you're saying nothing at the same time. So it's really important to be specific. So, vague. The Acme Corporation is developing a new consumer device that allows users to communicate locally in real time. Like, what does that mean? You're developing a new cell phone. Say what you mean. Don't be afraid to say that. And a lot of times people are like, well, if I, do this, it'll make me sound smarter. If I use these, descriptors and, meander around, it'll make me sound more intelligent. But that's not the case. It just makes you sound like you're trying to take up extra space. Eliminate unnecessary words. So important. Especially in grad school, they will give you very strict word limits on how many words you're allowed to have in a specific assignment, and it's really easy to want to go over that limit. And it's really easy to also get lost in your writing and use up valuable words with fluff. So by being specific and eliminating unnecessary words, you'll leave a lot more space for the stuff that actually matters. So I received and read the email you sent yesterday about the report you're writing for the project. I agree it needs a thorough, close edit from someone familiar with your audience. A lot of words, and we can say this in half as many words. I received your email about the project report and agree it needs an expert edit. Get to the point. Test revealed conduction activity is peculiar in nature. Test revealed peculiar conduction activity. It took out, 4 extra words and it made the sentence, it didn't change any meaning of the sentence, it just got to the point faster. And replacing multiple negatives with affirmatives, this one's pretty common sense. You want to write in the positive. You don't want to give your reader any opportunity to get lost in what you're writing, and when you're using double negatives, that would technically cancel out to create a positive. It's confusing, you can get bogged down, you can get lost. So your audience will not appreciate the details that lack relevance versus your audience will appreciate relevant details. Simple switch, simple, framework shift in how you're presenting the sentence, but so much more clear. Use transitions. Oh, this is so very important. As I was saying, when you write, you're telling a story. It's not like, you're not writing a short story, but you're taking your reader on a journey through your thought process. And to get from point A to point B, you have to lead them there. So transitions are important within paragraphs and between paragraphs. You should always be transitioning from idea to idea. And that can be as simple as using a before or a there or a, similarly. Or it can be as complicated as, as discussed previously, this link also is reflected in this following scenario. But you really need to lead your reader from point A to point B. Because otherwise it's like, well, what does this idea have to do with what we're talking about? Nominalizations, also so important. Has anybody ever heard of heard the word nominalization before, or know what it is? Great. We'll watch a short video about it. Hopefully this computer has
This
sound.
year, our 5-star zipper binder had 726 pieces of paper for 21 subjects. 4 pens, my phone, 3 notebooks, some food. But this year, I'll be ready for it all.
5-star is built strong.
Like me.
So, you'll see in a minute, this video really defines nominalizations really well. And this is such a pitfall for a lot of academic writing where they go overboard with nominalization. So you'll see what I mean by nominalizations through this. All right,
Take an adjective such as implacable, or a verb like proliferate, or even another noun, crony, and add a suffix such as ity or tion or ism. We've created a new noun, implacability, proliferation, cronyism. Sounds impressive, right? Wrong, you've just unleashed a flesh-eating zombie. Nouns made from other parts of speech are called nominalizations. Academics love them. So do lawyers, bureaucrats, business writers. I call them zombie nouns because they consume the living. They cannibalize active verbs. They suck the lifeblood from adjectives. And they substitute abstract entities for human beings. Here's an example. The proliferation of nominalizations in a discursive formation may be an indication of a tendency toward pomposity and abstraction. Huh? This sentence contains no fewer than 7 nominalizations, yet it fails to tell us who is doing what. When we eliminate or reanimate most of the zombie nouns, so tendency becomes tend, abstraction becomes abstract, then we add a human subject and some active verbs, the sentence springs back to life. Writers who overload their sentences with nominalizations tend to sound pompous and abstract. Only one zombie noun, the keyword nominalizations, has been allowed to remain standing. At their best, nominalizations help us express complex ideas. perception, intelligence, epistemology. At their worst, they impede clear communication. To get a feeling for how zombie nouns work, release a few of them into a lively sentence and watch them sap all its energy. George Orwell played this game in his essay, Politics in the English Language. He started with a well-known verse from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. It says, "I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all." Now here's Orwell's modern English version. Objective considerations of contemporary phenomena compel the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. The Bible passage speaks to our senses and emotions with concrete nouns, descriptions of people, and punchy abstract nouns such as race, battle, riches, time, chance, not a zombie among them. Orwell's satirical translation, on the other hand, is teeming with nominalizations and other vague abstractions. The zombies have taken over, and the humans have fled the village. Zombie nouns do their worst damage when they gather in jargon-generating packs and swallow every noun, verb, and adjective in sight. So globe becomes global, becomes globalized, becomes globalization. The grandfather of all nominalizations, anti-disestablishmentarianism, contains at least 2 verbs, 3 adjectives, and 6 other nouns inside its distended belly. A paragraph heavily populated by nominalizations will send your readers straight to sleep. Rescue them from the zombie apocalypse with vigorous, verb-driven sentences that are concrete and clearly structured. You want your sentences to live, not to join the living dead.
All right. Everybody understand what a nominalization is now? So, as this author so beautifully communicated, nominalizations are a really easy trap to fall into because we think that it makes us sound smarter, but it can actually, if you overuse them, put your reader straight to sleep. It's very confusing as to who is doing what. So if you are, I'm not saying don't use them because we are academics and they are an important part of our process and our practice, but monitor them. And watch your person. Typically, research papers are written in the third person. You should not be saying, I conducted a literature review that did X, Y, Z, or we interviewed, 40 people about this issue. It should be written in third person. So, it begs this question of who is we? And so, we looked at 10 different risk factors for obesity versus the research team investigated 10 different risk factors for obesity. So we have a concrete idea about who is doing what. There are several places where first person is acceptable. You're writing a paper that's based on positionality. It's based on who you are and your personal opinion, your personal position. That's obviously acceptable. Personal reflections. So if you're doing qualitative data analysis and it's requiring you to communicate how you are interpreting something, you can use it then. Oral presentations is also acceptable. Okay, punctuation pointers. Before we get a little bit further, I just want to quickly do a little bit of basic grammar review. John threw the ball to Susan. Who is the subject in this sentence? John. Correct. The subject is the person that does the action. Who is the object, the direct object in this sentence? ball.
The ball.
The ball, the direct object is the receiver of the action. Who's Susan? Susan is the indirect object in the sentence. She is helping to facilitate that direct object. So for writing clearly, it's really important that for every sentence you know who the subject is, you know what the verb is, what's happening, the through, and you know what the object is, who is the recipient of that action. So when you're looking at your sentences, if your subject is unclear, if you don't know, who is doing the action or who is the recipient of the action, you might want to restructure your sentence or add in more information so that your reader can tell that information. Okay, so punctuation pointers. Commas create continuity. Commas are something that can help break up separate items in a list. And the Oxford comma is so very important. Everybody should use the Oxford comma always, because if you don't use the Oxford comma, you can run into situations like this, where we invited the strippers, JFK and Stalin. Are JFK and Stalin our strippers? We don't know. And just by adding this other comma here, this is the Oxford comma, is the last comma in a list of things before the and. By adding this comma, it's clear that these are separate people. We invited strippers and JFK and Stalin. So adding that should be part of your practice. You should all be using the Oxford comma. That is typical academic writing. Separating independent clauses. An independent clause is a sentence that can stand, as a part of a sentence that can stand on its own. So independent clauses must create a subject and a verb. And when we have two independent clauses, they must be connected by a joint word. So this here, the hikers traveled for miles, is a complete sentence, as is they arrived tired. By joining those two independent clauses with a comma and a joining word, we've created a complete sentence. Had I not had this would not be a grammatically correct sentence, because we would have there'd be two sentences that are just joined together without anything telling us why you have two complete sentences that are joined together. So using that joining word is very important. You can use them to identify an introductory element. So this is a very important use of commas in academic writing. When you're writing complex sentences with lots of information in them, a lot of times you want to start by introducing an idea or a phrase or a concept, and you're going to set that off with a comma, and that shows us, okay, this is the background, this is the context that I need to understand this sentence. So, because the state has budget problems, many communities are faced with the loss of services. This is a complete sentence. Many communities are faced with the loss of services. This, because the state has budget problems, is not. That's why it's considered an introductory element. It's a dependent clause. It's reliant on the other half of the sentence to make sense. It can also be used to set off sentence interrupters, interjections, other things. I'll also send you guys all copies of these slides. As long as you're signed in, I'll email copies of the slides to you, so don't worry about taking down all these examples. So this is just a way to introduce other information to your reader, and you want to indicate that it's a little bit separate from your main idea. Set it off with commas. And we're going to talk in a minute about the dash, which is another way to do that, which is much more emphatic, much more powerful. All right, semicolon. Semicolons act as a link. So you can use semicolons when you have two independent clauses, just like that, the hikers, going for miles and they arrived tired. If you didn't want to have that and, you could use a semicolon to separate that instead. So the house was very old. It had been built in 1710. And I want to encourage you guys to really only use semicolons when these two independent clauses are inextricably linked. When the information in one of them is connected to the information in the other. It's a way to show that these two sentences, these two independent ideas are connected, and I want my reader to understand that they're related. It's also used for listing items. This is especially true if you're using a list where the separate items in the list have commas within them. When that happens, if you're just using commas, it can be really hard to know where one item of the list ends and the next one begins. So this allows us to see, you know, this is it has set up the description with commas. So it'd be, you know, where are all these different things ending? So by using a semicolon, we can see specifically Reginald Mack, a district attorney speaking on victims' rights, is one element of the list. Maria, a professor of law, speaking on the court system, is another, and Olaf is a third. So it allows us to really break that down so that our reader doesn't get confused on where the list begins or ends. Colons. Colons are used to separate independent clauses as well. And this is especially true when you're setting up an introduction about someone or something. It's like, here is what this is, colon, here is why that is the case. So it really allows you to connect different ideas. In the way that semicolons can be used to link sentences and show that they're related, a colon can be used to show that like one idea is following the other. Does that make sense? It's a bit of a different distinction.
There's more directionality with a colon.
Yes, exactly. It's more like you're introducing an idea and you're following up versus showing how two ideas are related.
And if you're listing something in a paragraph?
Yes, you can also use colons. We'll get to that in just a second, but it's used to introduce information as well, to introduce quotations. I guess I don't have a line on that, but Tim, that's an excellent point. It's also used when you want to list something. You know, I have 4 classes that I'm signed up for this semester, colon, biostatistics, determinants, and separate those items by commas. Dash. Dashes are such an important piece of punctuation that a lot of people don't know how to use properly. Dashes are my favorite punctuation mark, actually. There's 2 different types of dashes, and a lot of people will mix these up. There's the M dash. You can remember the difference between them. M dashes have 2, just like there's 2 humps in an M. N dash has just 1, because there's only 1 hump in the N. We'll start with N dashes because they're a little bit easier. This is for when you're using, when you need to show that 2 words are directly connected. It's also thought of as like a hyphen. A lot of people use that term to describe an N dash as well. So you'll write this a lot in public health. You'll use dashes a lot, like low income. That is a word that is hyphenated. Those 2 words on their own, low and income, don't really mean anything. But when we combine them together with a hyphen, the word takes on a totally different meaning. So it's a way to show that those 2 words are inextricably linked and you need to take them together. An M dash, on the other hand, EM, the 2 dashes, and when you're typing, you know, you'll do dash dash and then space, and your computer should automatically turn that into one longer dash. Is used to introduce additional information, but you don't want to set it up with a comma or parentheses. Using a dash is a way to draw your reader's eye to that information. Like when you're reading something and you see something in parentheses, your eyes gloss over it. Like your brain tells you, this isn't that important, let me skip over it. A dash, on the other hand, says, this is really important, look at this information that's inside of here. So it's a way to really draw your reader's eyes to that additional information. It's used to separate a pronoun from what it refers to, so you can use it in a similar way that you would use a colon, but again, it has a different, more emphatic connotation to it, and to convey a more emphatic side. So when you have an idea that is especially powerful that you really want to make sure that your reader gets, use a dash, but don't overuse dashes. It's the same thing with anything. If you use it too much, it loses its meaning, it loses its power. So dashes in moderation. Alright, tips for making your writing stronger. So important in academic writing to take you from that kind of juvenile level to a graduate school level. Using active voice. This is the single easiest thing you can do to turn your sentences around. Active voice versus passive voice. Does anybody know the difference between those 2 things? Chair.
In the active voice, you mentioned the subject always, like the doer of the action. But in the passive voice, you ignore or neglect the subject for some reasons, or you just mention that in a different way, because the most important thing is the action itself.
Absolutely, that is absolutely right. For passive sentences, we don't know who is doing the action. And for public health especially, it's really easy to be like, his obesity was caused by a poor diet. It's like, that is a weak sentence. That doesn't mean anything. Why does he have a poor diet? Make the subject say something. Make sure that you have who is doing the sentence to what. You need the subject and a direct object in a sentence to make it really strong and powerful. And like you were saying, so look at this example here. Mistakes were made that delayed the testing for weeks. We don't know who made the mistakes, and when we switch it around, the team made mistakes that delayed the testing for weeks. We know who is doing the action, and that also gives us a way to know where to target our next thing. Like if we don't know where the problem is coming from, how are we going to solve it? So passive voice, there are situations where passive voice is acceptable, where your subject is unknown, where you don't know who is actually doing it, where it's some phenomenon that's way up in the sky and you're not sure where it's coming from. You can use passive voice. Where you don't want to identify the subject, when the object is the more important thing, or what's happening to the object is the more important thing, you can leave the subject out. And Microsoft Word actually has a like add-on that you can use to check your writing for passive voice. So there's instructions in that link right there. You can go through that on your own time. Avoid to-be verbs. Very, very common in writing. To-be verbs are the is, are, do's, ams, been, beings. Look at this example. She is a student who is having difficulty with her essay. It's a lot of words. It's just wordy. It's a lot of words. It's not really saying much information. Versus the student struggled with her essay. Same idea that's being conveyed. A lot fewer words, and it's much more powerful and direct and to the point. So avoiding these words is a really easy thing. I had my 11th grade English teacher, anytime we had either of these, to-be verb or a weak verb, a word that he would call, he would deduct a point from our score. No questions asked. So it's a good practice to get into eliminating these types of words because they're weak, they make your writing sound weaker, and there's always a stronger way to say something. So these weak words include things like very. A lot of people will say, it's a very large problem. There's over 100,000 words in the English language. There's always a more powerful way to say something. She's not very sad, she's miserable, she's depressed, she's lugubrious. Like, use the words at your disposal, and you can use a thesaurus for that. Don't go thesaurus crazy. Make sure you know the meaning of the word before you use it. But don't use reallys, don't use varies. Pick a more powerful word. Okay. So any questions on grammar or sentence structure or punctuation points before we move on? Cool. And again, you can pause me at any time. So basic paper organization. This is going to be the same for every paper that you write pretty much ever. You're going to start with an introduction that's going to give you that first sentence hook to draw your reader in. If I'm looking at something and there's no hook, it's like, well, this is going to be boring. Like, I don't want to read this. Have something that draws your readers in, sparks their interest. Your introduction is also going to contain maybe some background or contextual information. And importantly, usually the thesis sentence is going to be the last or almost last sentence in that introductory paragraph. And a lot of people get confused about what the point of a thesis is, and in this context, I'm just going to encourage you guys to think of your thesis as the point of why you're writing. What is the information, why are you writing this assignment? What information are you trying to convey? Where are you trying to take your reader? And this introduction can also contain a roadmap of your paper. So a lot of times when you read academic papers, you'll hear, our process of recruiting people will be discussed, and then we'll move on to X, Y, Z. So it'll give your reader a preview about what to expect in their paper, and this is especially important for longer papers, so that people know what to expect and have a general idea of where your thought process is going. Your body paragraphs, as I said, transitions are key, both from paragraph to paragraph and within paragraphs. You always have to transition between ideas. Topic sentences is your first sentence in each paragraph. That's going to give your reader an idea of what that paragraph is about. Provide supporting evidence within that paragraph. And you also want to make sure that you stick to one idea per paragraph. Don't get, caught in this trap of wanting to include as much information as you can in each paragraph. If it's an idea that's important enough to include in your paper, it should have its own paragraph. It should have its own idea. So that's a really easy way to confuse your readers, is when you try to cram as much information as you can in one paragraph, and then you're like, well, what is this paragraph actually saying? What is this actually about? And at some point in each of your body paragraphs, it should be clear to your reader why you're including that information. Connect it back to your thesis so that there's a continual flow of logic. It's like, okay, this is important to this argument because of X, Y, Z. And your conclusion, you're going to rephrase your thesis statement. You're going to quickly summarize the main elements of your argument, and you are not introducing any new ideas. So important in the conclusion. That is not the place to say, oh, and this other thing that I didn't mention. That's not where it belongs. Your thesis, or your conclusion, is you're wrapping your paper up in a bow and handing it to whomever, and it should, someone should be able to read your introductory paragraph and your conclusion and still know what your paper was about. Subheadings, so important in academic writing, especially for papers that are longer. So longer, I mean longer than 4 or 5 pages. Use subheadings. A lot of times, subheadings are a roadmap for your reader, and just like for yourselves, think when you're looking at an essay and it's just paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. It's like your eyes blur. You can't tell where one idea ends. It's boring to read. So subheadings are a really great way to break that up and make it easier for your reader to follow your argument. So when you're outlining, I encourage all of you guys, when you're writing, to really start with an outline. It'll make your writing process so much easier and more efficient in the end. You'll naturally create some of those subheadings. A lot of research papers have subheadings already built into the way that they're structured: methods, result, discussion, conclusion. And you can allude to that into the subheadings in the introduction. First I'm going to be discussing the background about how this particular issue emerged, and then I will be discussing the policy considerations to address this issue. So it gives your reader, again, we're holding our reader's hand, we're taking them on this little journey with us. We don't want them to get lost on the way. So how to write an argument. There's this great article here. I have a couple copies if anybody wants to read the longer version, by Gerald Graff. And remember, what we talked about in the beginning. You're writing with a purpose. You're writing to convey an idea. You're writing an argument. You're trying to convince your reader of some kind of information. So these are good tips to make sure that you're writing an argument that it's a thoroughly thought out argument that is persuasive and engaging. So make sure that you define the context. Why are we writing? What is this contributing to what we know already? Why is this important to think about in the first place? Make a claim. You want to say something. You're not just discussing like, oh, there's all these things that are really complicated. It's like, no, we want to write with a purpose. You want to make a claim and stick to it. You are all researchers now. You've done your research. Make it sound like you know what you're talking about.
Hypotheses are trying to prove something or deny something.
Exactly. You got to say something. There's got to be a point to why you're writing. Remind your readers of your claim periodically. That'll be, echoing back to your thesis in all of your body paragraphs. Summarize objections. This is the sign of a truly informed researcher, when you've considered the other side and you're able to address their claims. If you know that other people might say this, rather than just ignoring it, it shows your reader that you're much more informed about the topic if you address it proactively. Say explicitly why what you're saying is different or important. Explain why it's necessary to write the essay in the first place. Are you adding new information to the literature? Are you introducing are you looking at this issue under a new framework or within a new context? One claim or point per paragraph, I already talked about that, that's important. Translate academic speak, those are those nominalizations that we were talking about in the beginning, into plain English. And this is my favorite one, grandma test. If you can't explain it to your grandma, the chances are you don't understand it yourself. And we're going to be practicing this a little bit when we go into our writing practice, but I use this when I write every single paper. This is such an important way to help yourselves make sure that you understand what you're doing. So really keep the grandma test. It's a good tool to use when you're writing. So questions to ask yourselves as you craft thesis statements. Is it a complete sentence and not a question? Are you actually saying something and not just asking another question? Does it have an opposing argument? You can't make a claim if there's nothing to counter it. It has to, be provocative. It has to be, there has to be something to counter it. Is every word clear and unambiguous in meaning? Are you getting to the point? This is about going back to writing concisely and clearly. Are you, wasting time by adding all these fluff words that don't really mean anything? We want the thesis to be concise and to the point so that we really understand what you're writing about. Is the sentence a dead end, or does it call for more information or explanation? We want to make sure that we're introducing our thesis in a way that's like, oh, well, yeah, let's read more, because there has to be more information to know about this topic. You want to make sure that your thesis is narrow enough in scope that it can be addressed within the page range that you have available. You can't say, I'm going to talk about all the risk factors for heart disease in this paper that is only 4 pages long. That's just not possible. And it should leave your reader with an idea of, what are they going to need to see to convince you of your thesis, to convince you that the argument is real. Okay, so I asked this a little bit in the beginning, but a couple people trickled in. We've got about an hour left, and in the remaining time, I have both time for working on a specific piece of writing that you've brought, and I also have a lot of information on references and citations. So I know that some people need to leave early, so I just want to gauge what your priorities are as students. Do you want to prioritize doing references and citations, or do you want to prioritize having more time to work on your writing pieces? Writing pieces? Okay, great. So does anybody here not have a piece of writing that they're working on that they can play with right now? Oh, a lot of you. All right, so in that case, we're going to do citations first and come back to that at the end. Okay, references. So important in academic writing. You don't seem smarter when you don't cite. It's not like, oh, look at me, I have all these great ideas, I'm going to present them, I've thought about all this stuff on my own. The way you gain credibility as an academic researcher is by showing that you've done the research and that you know what else is out there and that your ideas are coming from a credible source. So that's why anytime you use information that is not yours or common knowledge, you want to make sure you cite. Most public health programs, sometimes HPA likes AMA, but most of the time you're going to be writing an APA, the Psychological Association, and the common in-text citation format for that is last name, comma, year. So you'll be writing, here's my sentence about this piece of information, and then you will have your in-text citation afterwards, last name, comma, year, and that shows where you got that information from. And just a note, when you're doing in-text citations, punctuation goes inside the quotations if your citation is before the quote, but after the source if your citation is after the quote. So this is an example. Must be the footnotes, our period is within the quotations, but if I'm quoting here, my punctuation mark is all the way after the citation, and this just shows that this citation is a part of this quote. I see a lot of students that will put a period there and then put a period there, and that's not proper. Just one. Again, if the idea is not your own, you need to cite it. If you're using a direct quote, you need to indicate 3 pieces of information, not 2. You need the author, year, and page number so that we can go back and find specifically exactly where that quote came from. And if you're paraphrasing, you don't need to include the page number. You can if you want to, but it's not necessary. And you'll notice here for when you're writing and you're citing things, you don't necessarily have to have, this is the idea, last name, comma, year. You can mix that around and reformat your sentences to create some variety, and as long as you can map your reader back to the citation using that information, as long as all that information is included in the sentence, then it's fine. So this is especially important when the person that you're citing is especially credible, or the source is really important. Like, according to this national review of all of these things that has been, looked at critically and all this stuff, that's really important. We want to center that information. Then you might want to introduce it a little bit differently, and have the information and then just have the year at the end, and that way we know. We still have all the information we need to map back to our works cited list, but it's just creating a little bit more variety in your sentence structure, and it's highlighting the importance of that source to your writing.
If there's no page number, like if it's an online article, how do you cite that?
If it's an online article, you don't need to cite a page number. But that is a good question, because for situations where there is no author, a lot of times, like if you're citing a website, there won't be an actual author listed. The way APA works is the information that you cite in text should be the same information that is in your works cited list. It's a map back to your reference list. So in APA format, if there's no author, the thing that you include is actually the title of the article or the title of the webpage in quotes. So the, like, obesity 101 in quotations, comma, year, to map us back to that source. And I'll show you guys RefWorks in a little bit, which gives you a lot of great information on what exactly to include for which citation.
Excuse me. Can we use other system that is Harvard system?
For citing, like versus APA, you should use whatever your instructors tell you to use.
If this subject didn't tell me anything, I can use Harvard system.
I can't tell you, what to use, because I don't know what the assignment is or what your instructors are looking for. I would say if you're in a specific field and Harvard is, or you're writing for a journal and all the other journal articles use that citation format, then I would say use that. But I would check to make sure that your,
Format is
it's the same as other formats.
Are there websites that you use, where you put in the information and it spits out the proper citation for you? Websites that you use that you like?
We're gonna RefWorks.
RefWorks?
Yep, we're gonna be talking about RefWorks a lot. Okay, Kim O'Neill, 7 tips for citation. Kim O'Neill is a writing instructor on East Campus. She's fantastic. That's another resource that's available. If I'm ever not around or my hours are booked up, there is a writing center on East Campus that you guys all have access to, and so you can go there for writing help. I would recommend coming to me first just because I have public health background, so I can help with content and organization as well as just like grammar and citation stuff. Alright, tip number 1, avoid plagiarism. A lot of people don't realize they're plagiarizing when they do it. They're just like writing, and then they're really surprised when they get a 0 on the assignment. But a great way to avoid that is to keep track of your citation. So if you're creating an outline and you're writing down stuff, make sure as you're outlining to list where that information is coming from so you don't get bogged down at the end with like, oh, I don't know where this came from, I'm just not going to cite it. You're citing not just quotes, but all ideas that come from other sources. Talked about that already. And SafeAssign. Some of your professors will require you to submit an article or a paper through SafeAssign, which checks for plagiarism. But you can also proactively run things through SafeAssign to see yourself what you accidentally or
So we can use this as students, like by ourselves. We could just like SafeAssign.com or something, or
Yeah.
through the
I think if you
university?
just Google it, you can submit it through that way and just run it through to do a check for yourself. Plagiarizing.
Because, like, I have a personal examples when we submitted some things through SafeAssign, like, we'll give you a percentage of, like, sometimes 60%, like, what? And I thought, like, I'm doing my best to cite everything. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm exaggerating. So I asked some friends, they said, well, they have to send things. Then we talked to the instructor, they said, well, don't worry about it. That's just like, we know, and it's just something that SafeAssign do. I couldn't understand.
Yeah, so SafeAssign will look at your reference list, for example, and it will, if the title of an article matches, if that's included in your works cited, that'll pick that up as plagiarizing. So it's really, the thing to use SafeAssign for is like, don't just look at the percentage of what is plagiarized. Go through and it'll highlight specific points in your essay that may be problematic. So don't just look at the percentage, look at actually what they're flagging.
They highlighted whole sentence.
Yeah, like if you're direct quoting something and it's in quotations, they might pick that up as plagiarizing, but you can just go and say, oh, no, I cited this properly. Like, no professor's just gonna look at that and be like, oh, 60% fail.
Yeah.
That's not how SafeAssign works. That's not how professors use SafeAssign, I should say. Quote selectively. Very, very important. I see a lot of students that will just direct quote for everything and anything. You only want to use direct quotes when their words are definitive, eloquent, or controversial. If you paraphrase their words, you would lose some of the power or some of the meaning of their sentence. That's the only time you should direct quote. All other times, you should paraphrase. Because we want to not just have a summary of what somebody else has said, we want to understand how what they've said is relevant to your argument and how you're taking that information and synthesizing it and making it your own. So statistics should never be quoted. I never want to see a direct quote with 56% of all participants, blah, blah, blah. That is not an appropriate use of a direct quote. Results of a study, or concepts or ideas that are not DEC, definitive, eloquent, or controversial. So these are great ways of setting up quotes that you can use. You can sandwich quotes. You can, you can introduce direct quotes in a bunch of different ways. If you're not using a direct quote, you can still set up and explain that quotation. So you're not just dumping some information and then running. You want to make sure that you're showing why that information is really important. Another question I get a lot in the Writing Center is if you're writing a paragraph and every single sentence in the paragraph is the same source, it's from the same source, do you need to cite after every single sentence? And the answer is no, you do not. You can do what's called bookending, where in the first sentence of the paragraph you say, according to Jones 1998, blah, 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 have all your information, and then in the last sentence, where for that source, you'll have an end-text citation, and that indicates to your reader that everything on the inside is from that same source. Block quotes, if you're using a direct quote, that's 4 or more lines, you should block quote it, which means you're going to separate it onto a new line. You're going to take away the double spaces and you're going to indent it on both sides, and that just says to your reader, okay, this is all information, that is not my own words.
Can you repeat this again, please? Sorry.
For block quotes?
Yeah.
You're going to separate, so it's 40 or more words. I use, if it's more than 3 lines, really, you're going to want to separate it out. And it also helps you understand, because you don't want to be over-quoting something, and you don't want somebody else's words to take up so much of your precious, if you've got a 5-page limit, you want to condense down other people's words so that you have more room for your own thoughts. So you separate it onto a new line, you take away the double space, so it's single space, and you indent it on about 1/2 inch on both sides. And there's links here for examples on how to do that properly. So match in-text citations with the first word of the references. I talked about this already. You're making a roadmap for your reader to map from your text to your reference list. So it's very easy for them to find exactly the citation that you're pulling your information from. I'll let you guys look in on this stuff on your own time. want to have, basically for your reference list, you want 3 pieces of information and a clue. You want the author, the title of the journal, of the, whatever publication that it's from, and some kind of clue to help you track it down, whether that's a website or a volume number or something else. Okay, RefWorks. Who here has used RefWorks before? Okay, great. You guys are pros. I am gonna show you. Everybody here has access to a free RefWorks account as students here at the university.